Okay, today I'm just going to give you an overview of what to expect in your dentures course this semester. It's going to be a little difficult to be able to understand what everything is initially. One of the common phrases that Dr. Seals will say is, in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you're going to be ending. So I'm just going to give you an overview of everything that you're going to be seeing throughout the course in the order that you'll be seeing it. Just introduce you to a few names that you'll be seeing throughout the course and how things will be laying out. So to start with, you're going to take an impression. You'll take an impression using impression trays, as well as alginate, to create this impression. Now with the impression tray, I don't have the typodonts with me here, but you want to practice prior to using the impression tray to make sure that you have enough room. Now if you notice, there is just a little bit short here, so you're not going to properly catch the retromolar pad unless you use a little bit of boxing wax. So when you're initially doing these impressions, you want to be able to add to the end of your tray, and this will give you just a little bit more tray to be able to create the impression that you need accurately. And can you see how now, as I put the tray down, it covers the entire ridge? Okay, so that's going to be your goal. You want to be able to always start with the boxing wax initially, and that's really going to save you tons and tons of time rather than trying to just initially use the stock impression tray by itself, because that's what most students do. The professors really send you in there not telling you these things, and then you take your first impression and they're like, okay, well, it's good here, it's bad here, but you didn't catch all of the ridge. Take another one. So you really want to try to get that ridge right from the very, very beginning, okay? And so this is essentially what you want to do on your typodont, okay? Now at this point, well, we're in the junior labs, but you would be in the sim labs and you would have your sim man at your station and you would place your typodont into the mouth. Now keep in mind, in this course, while the professor is there, you're going to be doing it intraorally. And we'll go over how to do that later during our lab session. Okay? Now you want to be able to do the same thing with the maxillary cast. But one thing you'll notice is there's kind of this gap, and you'll end up taking an impression of all of Dexter's esophagus to avoid that, and you'll end up losing all of your material, so you won't be able to catch the ridges properly. So to prevent the tray material from exiting the posterior portion of the impression tray, you want to put a little bit of boxing wax first, okay? And then you can see that you can get it in there, okay? And so that will kind of prevent all of the material from exiting, okay? Now once you have completed this, and I'll show you the next step in a minute, you'll take an impression. From there, you'll end up duplicating these casts. And we'll go over shortly in our next video how to duplicate or how to pour up casts using the double pour method that is utilized in your complete dentures course. Now after you have your preliminary impressions, so first impressions are everything, right? How they say. So you take your first impressions, which are referred to throughout your manual as your preliminary impressions. From there, you'll make a custom impression tray using the clear triad material. Okay. you'll see how I have markings. Now these markings are made 2 millimeters from the vestibule. Now the reason that that's done is because you'll later go and you'll border mold using border molding compound. You'll border mold the custom impression tray against the typodont, and so it'll fill in that space. Once you do that, if you can see, you can get a more accurate border than you could initially. From there, you will complete the border molding using the border molding wax all the way around both maxillary and mandibular custom impression trays. Now from these custom impression trays, you will take impressions using a specific, the purple monophase PVS material. That's important to know. You always also want to get extra stuff of this, okay? Now you're going to make master impressions, and now this master impression has been boxed using red rope wax, and you'll do this in your course. It's a very frustrating class this day, so don't let it get to the better of you. Just know you have to get through it, make your master impression, and then if they don't come out perfect in real life, you do want them to. But you don't want to get caught up getting stuck in lab trying to create the perfect master impressions, because the very next day he will give you brand new perfect casts that are pre-made and that every single person has the exact same cast. Okay, so I have 2 of the same. Okay, so these are the casts that you'll be having. These are yellow. Now if you notice, the exact same cast in blue. Now the blue cast are what you're going to be using on your practical. The yellow ones are going to be the ones that you're going to be using throughout the rest of the course to make your record base. Okay, now once you've made your record base, this is going to be essentially what you're going to use to create a mold of the patient's palate, residual ridge. Okay, and once you have that record base, from it you're going to add some rope wax. Okay, let's see. You'll add a photo piece of rope wax, base wax, pardon me, base wax, and you'll add a flat layer that will be 10 millimeters high by 8 millimeters wide. Okay, so you'll transform your standard base record bases into occlusal rims. Okay, now from these occlusal rims, you will then transform those occlusal rims into anterior. You'll set the anterior teeth initially, and so you'll set the anterior teeth for both maxillary as well as mandibular. Okay, and so they'll look like this. Okay, now the important part of that is that, get this, your first exam will be over custom impression trays, so you want to practice that a ton, right? Your second exam will be over record bases. Now, do you notice something similar? They're made out of the exact same material. The only difference is one is clear and the other one has pink dyes and fibers to create a more natural tissue look. Now, if you notice, some of the same design that you use to create one, you're going to utilize to create the other. If you practice and get the record bases, the custom impression trays done really well, then the record bases are actually much easier to create. Now, this is going to be your second test, okay? Now, if you notice, you'll do them on these casts. So you'll end up lab work on this, test on your blue cast. So you will keep your blue cast, and you have to keep it preserved so you don't break it. Very, very important. If you notice on the bottom, you're going to have signatures, okay? You get these signatures on your third exam when you create the occlusal rims. So let's say you don't take my advice, you don't practice, you don't come to mono and monos, and you create a bad record base. If you want, and it breaks or something bad happens, you can actually create another record base prior to the start of the third exam. But right before the third exam starts, he'll come through and he'll put a signature. Prior to the start of the fourth exam, he'll put another signature. So you can see they're in two different colors, and that's what they're looking for to ensure that no cheating is done, no record bases are recreated, and that you have it throughout the end, okay? So, as I was saying, your third exam will be on record basis, and then your fourth one will be on setting the anterior teeth, okay? Now, the important thing is to do extremely well on the first and second exam, because those are the ones that you have slightly more control of. The third exam is very difficult to manage time, but I can teach you many time-saving tricks to be able to do the occlusal rims in 30 minutes. At that point, by the time you've completed your third exam, for many of you, your grade will pretty much be set. So you'll know what you need to perform in order to do well for the fourth exam, okay? Now, after you've set the anterior teeth, you'll continue to set the posterior using several, oh, I didn't bring it. You want floss. Using several, what they're referred to as landmarks, okay? And I'll go over more what these landmarks are. But you can set, we'll use this for now, a piece of floss across to be able to continue those landmarks. And do you see how you can create perfect straight posterior central grooves? Okay, so then from there you'll complete out the teeth, okay? And this will be the last few classes. Okay, so just a few tips for increasing your efficiency as well as your organization. So a few important tips to know is, first and foremost, on the day of the exam, you cannot enter your lockers. Another important thing is that you take your didactic lecture exam first, and you only have 10 minutes from the time that ends to the time your hand skills exam starts. So keep in mind, you're probably frazzled, sleep deprived, everything. It's going to be very difficult to remember every single little thing that you need for the exam. So why even stress about it, okay? Prior to the exam, you can put in another container everything that you'll need. Say it's custom impression trays, correct? So you can put some of your triad material. So here's a clear material that comes when you open these. It's the clear sheets that create this. I always recommend that you have extra because, believe it or not, they only give you 2 pieces, when in reality it takes closer to 4 to make a custom impression tray. So I always have extra just in case you need more or you mess up. On the test day, you also want to have things like your red-handled knife, an extra pen. You want to have a few cotton roll applicators because this is something that you utilize to create the custom impression trays. Really anything that you want to use. So that would be on your first test day. Now on your second one, when you make the record bases, it would be very similar. You'll still have the same things. But keep in mind for your next ones, you're going to be utilizing things like a hot spatula, a flat plate. You'll need floss. You'll need base plate wax, not nearly that much, but just an example. Now, and you'll also want another container to be able to keep all of these things so you don't have everything super messy in your locker like some crazy jungle, okay? So you want to be able to have nice and neat in one place, extra mounting plates as well as the magnets that go with them, extra articulating paper, extra custom impression tray material, extra alginate, things such as wax. You want to be able to practice these multiple, and towards the end, as you get closer to the exam, they start rationing you. So at the very beginning, regardless of if you need it or not, if you don't plan on practicing, it doesn't matter. I want you to pick up some base plate custom impression tray material, okay? Some triad. They'll give you 4 of them at first. As you get closer to the test, you'll only get 2 of them. What happens if you go the weekend before the test? That Friday, they only give you 2, and lo and behold, you were planning on shooting out 4 practices over the weekend. 4 practices times 4 sheets. You would have needed 16 of these packages. But now you only have 2. What are you going to do? You don't want to put yourself in that situation where you find yourself unprepared. So just collect a little bit of material throughout. A little bit of foresight goes a long way. The same goes with the base plate material. They'll give you 4 at any given time, but then right before the exam, they'll only give you 2. And on the day of the exam, they only give you 2, but you are entitled to have your own stuff. Okay? Finally, you're going to be making a lot of casts, okay? You want to be able to keep these all together. You'll notice some people won't listen to these tips or hadn't heard them, and you'll look into their locker and it is a mess, a jungle. Being able to keep all of your excess stuff that you've hoarded or protected, invested in your future, having all of your exam material together, and then as you go, you want to be able to collect these. Well, maybe not those are slightly less important, but definitely your record bases. You want to keep every single time that you practice, you want to keep these because that means you have more record bases to practice your occlusal rims on, okay? So you'll end up, ideally, I always tell my students is, if you want to make sure to have that A, to have those really good hand skills, you want to shoot for 10 practices. Yes, realistically speaking, that's not always going to happen. But if your goal is 10 and you shoot for 7, that's a lot better than if your goal was 5 and you shot and you only hit 2 practices. Okay? So having a bigger goal will help you to shoot for a little bit more. It's almost more important to have more record bases, so that way you also have more occlusal rim practice material. Occlusal rims are very difficult to get the timing right. Record bases can be very difficult to get the steady right. They can be very unsteady if made improperly, and that's a 2-point deduction. Okay? Okay, so we're gonna have make some impressions right now. I don't have the type it on, but we're going to use one of the previous impressions that we made, so you get a 2-for-1. I'll show you how to duplicate a cast as well. Something you'll be doing very, very often. Okay, so that way I wouldn't ruin the cast. I have put some jelly on there. Okay. So whenever you duplicate a cast, a few things that you want to do is you want to start, as I previously said, by putting a little rope wax on it, and making sure that everything fits properly. Okay, you want to practice placement as well because you only have one shot. Okay, so we're going to put adhesive on here. You always want to make sure that your trays are adhesive. Just a little tip from me to you, the probability of you getting that perfect impression on your first day, on the first try, probably isn't going to realistically happen. I would recommend, for time efficiency, to make about 3 of these, pre-roped wax, pre-adhesive, because I tell you what, after the first time that you mess up, or the second time, you're going to get flustered. By the 7th time, you're over it, okay? So make several extra. So you want to have at least 3 pairs, okay? That'll give you a little room for backup. And let's say you get lucky and you make that perfect first impression or that perfect second impression. Well, you can give your extra one to your friend and now you're a hero, okay? So after you have them adhesive, you always want to, it's essential, you always want to start with a clean mixing bowl. And you want to put your water in first, okay? After you've added your water, you want to put your powder into your water. That will prevent it from clumping. You never want to put water into powder. Always powder into water. Now, when you initially mix, you want to first mix in the center to get everything nice and wet, right? Now after you finish that, now this is a special technique. This will ensure that you have a nice smooth mixture. So it's flat and then flip, flat and then flip. Now as I'm doing that, notice my fingers. You want to start rotating the container, okay? And see how I go back and forth a few times and then I move my fingers, okay? And so as you're doing it, see how it's becoming that nice cake batter like mixture? It's no longer clumpy. It's nice and smooth. You can go through and grab everything one last time and then cake batter. Okay. Keep in mind you only have about 2 minutes. The longer you work on this, the worse it is. So you want to fill your tray starting from the back, coming down. Then from there you can smooth it out. Add more to the back. The back is really going to be where you lose a lot. Okay, and see how it's nice and flat? Now, in Dexter, in real life, you want to use a monojet syringe with the tip cut off to here. You want to pack this. I typically pack this first prior to filling my tray. But in SimLab, they're not going to give you that. Okay, so you want to go through with your Dexter and you just want to put a little bit of impression material inside the vestibule, because that's going to be the one thing that you're probably not going to capture, and that's going to make most students have to go back. Another thing that you do is you can put a little bit right on the palette. Okay, once you do this, you can, we'll pretend that it's inside of Dexter, right? You have Dexter laying flat down. You're going to put it, and see how it's already starting to slump? Okay, so that's something that you have to worry about. With Dexter laying in the supine position, you put posterior down first, and you move down to anterior. Okay, so they say go at that perpendicular and lay flat. Okay, so inside Dexter with him laying, that's what you're going to see. Another thing they tell you is you never ever want to leave your patient with material in their mouth or anything, so you're going to continue to hold them. The proper fingering position, I think I flew through that while this is setting, we have 2 minutes, is you want to support it, but you don't want to just support it in the back because then you'll have a heavy impression. So thumb, fingers, peace sign, okay? Okay, and you want to try to get it as centered as possible, okay? To ensure you have a nice, good impression. Okay, so while you're doing that, right, you can come over here, have a little bit of this, and you can just play in your hands with it. And this is how you'll know if you have good impression material. Now, key word, test knowledge, is you have 12 minutes to make this impression. That's going to be something that you're going to see come up on quizzes, on tests. It's constantly asked by your professor. 12 minutes for maximum accuracy, okay? And you will pour it using the double pour method. Okay, so in SimLab, we're really not working with the patient, so this would be a good time to kind of clean up your knife, your bowl, everything, okay? So that way, and you want to wait until it gets slightly hard, so that way it's easy to clean, but if you wait too long, then it becomes slightly harder, okay? Okay, so once you do that, then you have a nice impression, okay? Now some of the things that you want to look for are there voids? So there's a difference between acceptable voids and unacceptable voids, okay? So if you look here, we have a few small ones on the palette. In this situation, because you're only making a custom impression tray, these you can actually go ahead and burr off. We have a few small voids here. You want to try to minimize those voids areas. Of course, one of the things that's going to affect it is the fact that I put petroleum jelly on here, okay? So we'll incorporate a few more voids, but I would say that this would be an acceptable ridge, an acceptable impression for the first impression custom impression tray. Okay, so since you have 12 minutes prior to making your next impression, you want to pour up that impression. I don't care if you feel unsure if it is the perfect impression and you want to try out and see if you can get another impression, you still pour it, okay? Because there's no telling if your next impression will be as good. I've definitely made that mistake, and I've seen other people make that mistake and say they wish they had just poured up that impression. Okay, so regardless of how you feel about it, pour it. Okay, again, you want to pour your water first and then your stone. And I'm using a Whip Mix vacuum spat bowl. We in the junior labs have slightly different than what y'all have, but you want to always use a vacuum. Okay, so again, you want to mix slightly, and you'll learn later that it's pre-mix, and then you're gonna mix for an additional few seconds. Okay, now what this is gonna do is this is gonna minimize the bubbles that you have, and the machine's not on. Okay, and so yours is slightly different. For yours, you're gonna be using a hose. You wanna make sure that you're at 27 seconds, okay? And y'all will have to hold it. For the junior labs, these are self-sufficient, so at this point is when you can walk over and start cleaning up your bowl or whatever you might have, okay? Let's see. Can you hand me that impression? Okay, from there, you want to a little high. You want it on low vibrate, and for y'all have a little vibrator on the machine. Prior to opening it, go ahead and just vibrate it out a little. This will allow all of the mix to settle. Okay, then you want to open it, and from there you just want to add small increments. Okay, so we can add to the palette, okay, because the palette's really going to be the least important. Okay, you really want to capture that ridge and see how it kind of just flows on. Okay, you can continue. See how I'm not You don't want to dollop it. I'm trying to minimize the air bubbles that are incorporated into it, okay? It's going to be inevitable. You're always going to get some air bubbles until you perfect that technique, okay? So keep on practicing. Try not to get discouraged. Okay, once you have all of the important areas filled, then you want to just add a little along the edges, okay? And then they say to add, you want to add 3 little dollops. Now this is going to help create undercuts, so that way when you make your second pour, it holds on to something, okay? Okay. And then you can just place this onto the side of your lab bench, okay? And you're gonna wait for about 25 minutes before you do your second pour. Okay, now once you have your first pour and 25 minutes have passed, you can begin doing your second pour. I recommend getting the grams base former. I have provided you a link with how to purchase those. I recommend you purchasing them now so they'll come in the mail by the time that you need to use them for your laboratory course. These will be essential and you will continue to use them over your next 3 years. They're worth every penny. So utilizing 2 packages and 80 milligrams of water, we'll pour both packages into the water. Now, using the vacuum mix was essential for the first pour. It's preferable for the second pour as well, but in second year, sometimes you might not always have the vacuum mix. And like I said before, you want to mix it until you have it all wet. And then we'll put it now for those who do not have a base former, some of the different ways that he'll have you make it is either making a slab of microstone and then you'll rest it. You'll rest your first pour onto that microstone putty. Now, since we do have a base former, we're going to vibrate it before opening it. Okay. 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 And then we're just going to lay it all in. Ideally, you want to rinse it immediately. The lid. Okay. And then you will lay it as flat as possible. Okay. And so you want it to look like this, okay? And this will allow you to get the proper dimensions all the way around. Now, when you finish your second pour, you're going to end up with something that looks about like this. You'll have excessive stone in some areas which will need to be trimmed off, as well as a height that is too thick. Now, some key numbers that you need to know are going to be when you trim your cast, you want it to look more like this one. So you want it to be with the ridge parallel to the base, as well as the sides to be perpendicular to the base and the ridge. Okay, so when you look at it, you want to ensure that it is parallel. Okay, and these will be perpendicular. You want your height to be 15 millimeters from the most shallow place. So you'll be measuring right here with your calipers, okay, at the pallet. Another number that you need to keep in mind is that you'll want it to be 3 millimeters wide for your land area and 2 millimeters deep for the vestibule. Okay. And you want to watch for the frenula. Okay, so you'll have multiple frenula areas. See how I can trace it, and it just continues with that 2 millimeters. You don't want it too shallow, okay, or too deep. You'll see that I have a black line traced out here. Now that black line is also 2 millimeters from the depth of the vestibule, and later you'll see that that's because we're going to put a custom impression tray, and that's going to be our border. Now the 2 millimeters will be filled up with compound material when you do the border molding.